Tonight, before anything opens, before any secret key turns, before any quiet palace begins to remember your footsteps, let the day loosen its hold on you. Let the thoughts that have been circling for hours begin to soften around the edges, like chalk under mist, like footsteps fading from a garden path after rain. There is nowhere else you need to be now. Nothing more is required of your hands, your mind, or your heart. The work of being awake is done for today, and the deeper, older work of resting can begin. Feel the steady support beneath you, not as an object, not as a piece of furniture, but as a patient surface that has agreed to hold everything you no longer need to carry by yourself. Let your shoulders descend. Let your jaw unfasten. Let the little muscles around your eyes grow loose and quiet, as though even they have been waiting for permission to stop. Your breathing need not be forced into any pattern. It only needs to be noticed, a breath arriving, a breath leaving, a small tide moving in the dark. Imagine, just beyond the last bright room of the day, that there is a garden hidden inside you. Not a grand one, not a place of performance or perfection, but a private, twilight garden that only blooms when you are still enough to enter it. The sky above it is the gentle color between lavender and silver. The air smells faintly of jasmine after sundown, and the earth beneath your bare feet is cool, steady, and deeply kind. No gates swing open with drama. No great music announces your arrival. You simply find yourself there, as though you had always known the path, and only forgotten it for a while. The trees in this inner garden do not crowd you. They lean back just enough to let you pass in peace. Their leaves murmur together in a language too soft to be translated, though somehow your body understands it. A low stone path curves ahead, and each step you take along it seems to quiet something in you that had been restless. You are not walking toward a task. You are walking toward a softer version of your own attention, one that does not strain or hurry. Nearby there is a pond, still as polished glass, and when you kneel beside it, the water does not offer you your ordinary face. It reflects something gentler, a calmer self, a quieter self, the self that was never truly lost, only covered for a while by schedules, noise, decisions, and the countless little frictions of living. This self looks back at you without judgment. There is no disappointment in that gaze, no impatience, no list of unfinished things, only recognition, only the faint and beautiful certainty that beneath everything, you have always remained yourself. Let that reflection settle into you. Let it move through your chest and shoulders, into your hands, into the backs of your knees, into the places where tension hides, because it has forgotten that it can leave. There is nothing to solve here, nothing to become. You do not need to improve in order to rest. You do not need to prove in order to be held by the night. The garden asks nothing of you, except that you remain. And as you remain, as you lie here, and let your breathing soften around this inner quiet, something small and luminous begins to stir at the edge of the path. Not an alarm, not a summons, only the first delicate sign that a door inside the world is preparing to open. A single butterfly appears before you, pale as candlelight behind thin paper. It does not startle the garden. It belongs here. It moves in one slow circle, then comes to rest on a low branch close enough for you to see the softness of its wings. Another soon follows, then another, until the twilight air contains a quiet drift of living color. None of them rush, none of them demand your attention. They simply gather, as if they have received some message carried on the evening air and come now to meet it. The butterflies are not bright in the harsh way of noon. Their light is gentler than that, warmer, almost thoughtful. One is the faint blue of morning, seen through curtains. Another glows with the gold of honey in a glass jar. One seems made from pearl and moon milk, and another is so transparent that you see the garden through it, tinged for a second with silver. They move with a softness that makes the whole air feel more tender, more breathable, as though even the silence has become textured by wings. They gather around you without crowding you. One settles lightly near your shoulder, another brushes past your wrist like the memory of touch. There is something childlike in the wonder of them, but not childish. It is the older kind of wonder, the kind that returns when effort falls away and the heart remembers that it is allowed to be surprised by beauty. You do not ask why they have come. Somewhere below the level of thought, you already know they are not random. They have arrived because you have become still enough to notice them. The path beyond the pond seems to glow more softly now. The air thickens with the scent of wet leaves and distant rain, and for a moment, the garden wavers, not in danger, but in transition. The butterflies lift together, then drift in one direction, pausing once as if to be sure you are following not with your feet, but with your trust. The invitation they offer is not dramatic, it is intimate, a small opening, a suggestion rather than a command. Come. They seem to say, something has been waiting with a patience older than hurry. Then, as often happens in dreams, the scene shifts not by force, but by feeling. The garden remains, yet beyond it, another place begins to layer itself into the hush. You sense rain tapping on old windows, the faint scent of dust, paper, and wood polished long ago by loving hands. The dim golden atmosphere of a house that remembers several generations at once. The butterflies do not disappear. They become the bridge with every quiet beat of their wings. The twilight garden leans further into another memory, another threshold, until the path beneath you is no longer stone warmed by dream, but old floorboards holding the cool breath of a rainy afternoon. There are some books that do not place themselves in our hands when we are young enough to demand them. They wait for a slower season, for a day when the weather is gray and unhurried, for a house full of soft creaks and sleeping memories, for the exact inner silence in which a hidden thing can finally be recognized. The butterflies settle along the shelves as though they have returned to a place they know. Their small lights tremble over worn wood, faded wallpaper, and the deep corners of a room where the past has never fully stopped breathing. And there, tucked farther back than any ordinary hand would reach, resting in its own pocket of shadow, is the book that has been waiting for someone very particular to find it. She finds it on the upper shelf of her grandmother's old house, where the light is always slightly dimmer and the air seems richer with time. Rain taps against the windows in a patient rhythm, and somewhere in the walls, the wind travels from room to room like a guest who no longer needs permission to enter. The house has the sort of silence that is never empty. It holds old songs, old recipes, old griefs softened by repetition, old mornings folded into curtains and rugs and cedar drawers. It is a house that has learned how to keep things safe without explaining itself. The book is bound in deep blue velvet, its surface smooth where hands may once have rested, rougher at the corners where time has gently thinned it. There is no title on the cover, no author's name, only a narrow line of gold along the edge, catching the weak afternoon light like a thread that has not quite stopped glowing. When she lifts it from the shelf, the dust does not burst outward in a cloud. It rises delicately, almost beautifully, as though even dust has learned to move softly in this room. She opens the cover with the care one brings to a sleeping thing. Inside, the pages have been carved away, not torn, not ruined, but hollowed with incredible patience, leaving at the center a small hidden chamber lined in faded silk. Nestled there lies a key. It is silver, lightly tarnished, and shaped with such delicacy that at first it looks more like an ornament than a tool. One side of it resembles the curve of a butterfly's wing. The other narrows into the slender certainty of a key that has always known which lock it belongs to. The moment her fingers touch it, the room changes. The rain seems to pause in the air, not stopping entirely, but listening. The walls grow quieter. The floorboards cease their old conversation, even the clock downstairs, which has been ticking for decades whether anyone heard it or not, appears to inhale and wait. In her palm, the key feels cool and warm at once, as if it belongs equally to metal and memory. It is not merely an object, it carries a tiny pulse, a private life of its own. A paper-thin tag is tied to its stem with a nearly invisible thread. The paper is brittle with age, so fragile it seems one breath away from becoming dust. Yet 3 words remain, written in a hand so fine it looks almost woven rather than ink. It waits quietly. Nothing in the room explains the phrase, and yet it explains everything. Not loudly, not logically, but somewhere under the surface of ordinary thought. A small and neglected part of her leans toward those words as if hearing an old melody return after years of silence. It waits quietly. It waits impatiently. Not it waits in danger. Not it waits unless you prove yourself worthy. Only quietly. Only with the softness of something that understands timing better than fear ever could. She slips the key into her pocket. The butterflies along the shelves stir as one, their wings brightening by the smallest degree. Beyond the room, beyond the rain, beyond the familiar breathing of the old house, there is the distinct sensation of another place listening back. Not far away in any ordinary sense, simply near in the hidden geography of dreams. Somewhere, a gate is sensing its key. Somewhere, a corridor is brightening by fraction. Somewhere, a palace made not of conquest, but of remembering, is preparing to open its doors. She does not remember deciding to lie down. Only the softness of an old blanket, the muted rain, the tiny weight of the key against her dress. The phrase moving through her thoughts like the final line of a lullaby. It waits quietly. She repeats it once without meaning to, and the room grows warmer around the edges. Her eyes close. The rain continues, or perhaps it becomes wings. The floor beneath the house falls away into moss and moonlight, and by the time she opens her eyes again, the house is gone, though not lost, and another world has arranged itself around her with dreamlike certainty. She wakes beneath a sky held in place by marble arches. Moonlight streams through them in long pale ribbons, laying silver patterns across the ground. Beneath her is no ordinary bed, but a soft nest of moss and white petals cool against her skin and fragrant with something faintly sweet, something older than perfume and cleaner than memory. When she sits up, there is no jolt of confusion. The place before her makes emotional sense immediately, which is the truest kind of sense a dream can offer. The air is rich with honeysuckle, whetstone, and the crisp scent that clings to pages in a forgotten fairy tale. Columns rise around her, slender and luminous. And beyond them, a courtyard opens in every direction at once, tangled with silver vines and flowering grasses that sway without any visible wind. High above, the moon hangs immense and tender, not cold, not remote, but watchful. The stars seem lower here, drawn down toward the palace roofline, as though they too have come to witness what will happen next. And everywhere there are butterflies, hundreds at first, then thousands as her eyes adjust. They drift among the columns, skim the tops of still ponds, rise from ivy with the hush of silk against silk. Some are the blue of dawn before birds begin, some shine in warm amber shades, as though candle flames had learned how to breathe. Some are nearly transparent, outlined only by a thin silver seam, like memories held just at the edge of visibility. Their movement fills the palace with a kind of living quiet, not silence broken, but silence made visible. She stands, her bare feet meet smooth stone lit from within by a soft bioluminescent bloom. With every step she takes, pale flowers open beneath her, then slowly close again after she passes, as if the ground itself is acknowledging her without wishing to interrupt the peace. Her dress has changed too. It falls around her in loose folds, the color of shadow just before dawn. A fabric light enough to move with breath, heavy enough to feel real. She does not stop to question any of it. dreams have their own gracious laws, and this palace seems to obey them perfectly. Along one side of the courtyard, beneath a flowering tree that hums almost imperceptibly, there rests a stone bench. Upon it lies a journal bound in cream-colored paper, etched with curling vines and tiny winged shapes. When she opens it, the pages appear blank for a moment, then slowly fill with words in faint, luminous ink. You have entered the palace. It remembers what you forgot. Follow the wings. They know the way home. Home. The word stirs something low and deep within her, something more tender than homesickness and more ancient than memory. She traces the sentence with her fingertip, and the words dissolve as if they have already given her all they needed to give. The butterflies gather in a loose, bright line just above the path ahead. They do not press close. They wait. The palace, like the journal, seems to understand that guidance is most powerful when it is gentle. So she follows them. She passes beneath a low archway, veiled in silver ivy, and enters a corridor where the cool air changes, carrying the hush of interior stone and deep, sleeping chambers. The sound of the courtyard falls behind her. A new kind of quiet takes its place. Not emptiness, expectation, the sort of hush one hears in old theaters before the curtain lifts, or in old chapels just after candlelight has been kindled. The palace is not merely showing itself to her, it is beginning to wake in her presence, and deeper within that waking palace, another layer of guidance waits. Not written this time, but hanging in the dark like a patient little star. The glowing door is carved from pale wood and fitted with a handle shaped like a leaf. Its light is not dramatic. It comes from within the grain itself, as though the memory behind it has been awake for some time and is simply relieved to be noticed. She presses her palm to the surface, and the latch yields without resistance. Inside is not a room, but a preserved moment. A child sits on a windowsill in the blue hush of evening, knees tucked up, face turned toward a night sky pricked with stars. In her lap is a sheet of paper covered in sketches. Towers, arched bridges, butterflies in place of flags, moonlit gardens, a palace impossible and tender. She has drawn it not as a place she has seen, but as a place she somehow expects to exist. The child is herself, not exactly as she remembers, because memory often sands away what is most delicate. This child is softer and more serious than in family photographs, more luminous too. There is concentration in the angle of her head and an unquestioned faith in the world beyond the window. She has not yet learned to dismiss wonder as impractical. She has not yet hidden her private maps. Her longing has not yet been translated into usefulness, politeness, or the thousand small habits by which adults persuade themselves to stop wanting what cannot be measured. The dreamer does not enter all the way. She stands at the threshold and watches the child draw another butterfly near the gate of the paper palace. The lantern in her hand grows warmer somewhere behind her. Very far away and very close, the palace listens. She expects grief, perhaps, or shame at having let such softness go. But what arrives is quieter, recognition first, then tenderness, then the subtle ache of understanding how much of life is shaped not by what we lose, but by what we stop speaking to. The child looks up as if sensing she is not alone. Though their eyes do not quite meet, something passes between them all the same. A current of remembered possibility. A small bright thread not broken after all. When she closes the door, she does it the way one would tuck a blanket beneath a sleeping shoulder. No slamming, no sorrow sharpened by regret, only care. The butterflies circle the lantern once, and its glow brightens by a gentle degree, as if this first act of seeing has fed it. She walks on. Another corridor opens into a room lined with frames. They hang from floor to ceiling, every shape and size, some of old carved wood, some of pearl, some of stone, some braided from silver reeds. At first, each frame holds only fog, not emptiness, but breathy shifting mist. She moves toward the nearest one, drawn not by curiosity alone, but by a longing so familiar, it almost feels like a scent. The fog begins to clear. There stands another self beneath a flowering tree, hair wind-tangled, arms full of notebooks and wildflowers, smiling in that unguarded way people do only when joy belongs to no audience. In the next frame, another version of her, older perhaps, barefoot in a city of rain, carrying paint-stained papers beneath her arm. In another, she is reading aloud to an owl perched on a windowsill. In another, she is silver-haired and laughing in a field of dusk-lit insects. In another, she walks alone along a coast at dawn, not lonely, simply complete. These are not failures, not ghosts of lives wasted. They are the selves she might have become. The branches that were never cut away so much as left quietly growing in another dimension of the heart. Seeing them does not wound her the way she feared it might. The room is too kind for that. Instead, it offers a larger understanding. That possibility does not disappear when unlived. It folds inward. It waits, sometimes sadly, often patiently, for recognition. She stands in the center of the framed room, with the lantern balanced in both hands, and lets all those versions of herself remain. Not claimed, not explained, not chosen above the others. Simply welcomed. The butterflies hover beside her in reverent silence. At last, with a gratitude older than speech, she whispers into the room, "I see you now." And because the palace hears what is true, a new door opens ahead, smooth and handleless, reflecting her face as though it were about to show her not another memory, but the room from which all the others have always grown. Beyond the first remembered room, the palace offered her another quiet corridor, as if to teach her that understanding does not arrive in a straight line but in circles, spirals, soft returns. When she first left the room of forgotten selves, the lantern had not led her directly toward the central court. It had guided her instead through a narrow passage paneled in wood, darkened by age and polished by the brush of invisible sleeves. The air there smelled of cedar drawers, old envelopes, and violets pressed flat between book pages. At the end of the passage, she entered a chamber of letters. They rested everywhere, in drawers left ajar, on tables of pale walnut, tied with ribbons that had faded into the color of dusk. Some were sealed, some had never been folded, some had only a single line written in the center of the page. Others were densely covered in hand, after hand, of careful script. Yet none of them felt exposed. The room held them with the same discretion a night garden gives to unopened flowers. She lifted one from a stack nearest the window. The paper was thick, cream-colored, edged in soft gold. No name was written at the top, no date at the corner, and yet, as she unfolded it, she recognized the atmosphere of the words immediate. This was a letter she had once meant to write and never had. Not to a grand lost love, not to an absent monarch of the past, but to someone who had sat beside her at a table years ago and spoken a kindness she had not known how to receive. In the letter, she thanked them, not only for what had been said, but for having seen a softness in her before she herself had learned how to protect it. Another letter had no recipient at all. It was written from a version of her who had survived a difficult season and wished to send backward some impossible comfort to the self still moving through it. The lines were simple. You are not failing because you are tired. You are not lost because the road is hidden. Rest, and the shape of your life will return to you more gently than you think. There were letters to friends who had drifted away without bitterness, letters to old rooms, letters to almost loves, letters to mornings that had once felt unbearable and were now only memory, letters to bodies changed by time and weather, letters to courage, letters to fear, letters that forgave, letters that blessed, letters that needed no answer because their purpose was not exchange but release. She did not read them all. The palace was too wise for that. It offered not saturation, but enough to understand that many burdens remain heavy only because they were never translated into tenderness. Enough to feel how often The soul composes unsent mercy in the dark, and then leaves it folded in a corner because daylight feels too practical for such things. So she returned the letters gently to their places. The butterflies, who had followed in only a few at a time, rested upon the ribbons and unsealed edges, turning even the paper into something alive with quiet witness. The lantern's glow changed in that room, becoming less golden than before, touched now with soft rose and blue, the colors of old ink fading on a page kept out of the sun. When she stepped back into the corridor, the air around her felt less crowded. Not emptier exactly, more breathable, as though words she had once carried unsaid had been opened, just enough to stop pressing so hard against the inside of her chest. And because the palace understood that release is tiring in its own tender way, it drew her next, not into another revelation, but into a slower and more comforting place. She came then to a conservatory whose glass roof had long ago been kissed into opacity by moonlight and rain. Vines threaded through the metal ribs above, and broad leaves collected silver drops that fell from time to time into bowls of stone below. The whole room glowed with a damp green hush. Ferns unfurled from porcelain urns. White blossoms opened among dark leaves. Somewhere water moved through hidden channels with the gentlest possible persistence. This was a room for those parts of the self that do not bloom on command. She set the lantern down on a low ledge and sat upon a bench of warm wood polished, smooth by years. No calendar had counted. The butterflies did not circle here. They settled. A few clung beneath leaves translucent in the moonlit roof. One rested upon the handle of the lantern. Another folded itself into the center of a white flower. Their stillness made the room slower than any room she had yet entered. In the conservatory, thoughts did not arrive as words. They arrived as growth, as patience, as the memory of all the things that had taken longer in her life than she had believed they should. Healing, trust, rest, forgiveness, the willingness to begin again without punishing oneself for needing another beginning. Nothing in this room had been forced into blossom by urgency. The vines had climbed because climbing was in their nature. The ferns had unfurled because darkness and moisture and time had made the right conditions. Even the flowers that opened only at night did not apologize for their hour. She leaned back and watched the slow shine of water along the inside of a leaf. How many times, she wondered without turning the thought into a wound, had she mistaken delay for failure? How often had she looked at some inward season of waiting and assumed nothing was happening because nothing visible had yet opened? The conservatory answered, not with explanation, but with atmosphere. Things may be deepening when they do not appear to be moving. Roots may be making their invisible choices while the stem above still seems bare. The soul may be preparing a quieter bloom than the world usually praises. As that understanding settled, she felt a softness in her body, unlike any she had known in the brighter rooms of ambition and identity. Her limbs grew heavy, pleasantly heavy, the sort of heaviness that does not pin but cradles. Her face relaxed, even the place between her brows, where unspoken effort so often gathered, loosened into rest. If the palace had a lullaby, perhaps it was this room. Leaf shadow, water sound, moon-muted glass, and the simple permission not to hurry your own unfold. She might have slept there if dreams within dreams were not always gently moving somewhere beneath the visible stillness. After a while, one of the butterflies lifted itself from the flower and drifted toward a side door, hidden almost entirely by climbing jasmine. Not insistently, simply enough for her to notice, she picked up the lantern, now glowing with a damp green-gold tenderness, and followed. On the other side of the jasmine door, the air turned cooler and carried the dry sweetness of linen, lavender, and sun that had shone long ago but somehow remained folded into cloth. The next chamber was a room of folded things. Shelves lined the walls from floor to ceiling, not with books this time, but with blankets, shawls, handkerchiefs, ribbons, quilts, and garments of every season. Nothing felt museum-like, Nothing was displayed for admiration. It was all arranged as one arranges beloved practical things, with care, with memory, with use still lingering in the weave. A winter scarf smelling faintly of cedar and smoke, a linen dress touched with salt as if from an old seaside afternoon, a patchwork quilt stitched from pieces of lives too varied to summarize, a child's blanket gone soft with years of being held against warm skin. She understood immediately that this room belonged to comfort, not the loud comfort of indulgence, but the humble, sacred comfort of what has wrapped us, dried us, kept us warm, hidden us, soothed us, and made us feel for 1 hour or 1 season that the world could not entirely reach us. It was a room made of gentleness, stored in fabric. Her fingers drifted over folded edges. Each textile held a faint atmosphere of the life around it. One shawl carried the smell of cardamom tea and long conversations after midnight. One quilt radiated the deep contentment of sleeping through winter rain. One ribbon held the weightless memory of laughter in a field where the wind had kept stealing hats. None of it made her ache with longing. The palace was more merciful than that. Instead, the room reminded her that consolation has always existed in small material forms. A sleeve, a hem, a blanket tucked beneath the feet, a coat held open by someone who notices you are cold before you say a word. At the center of the room stood a low bed layered with white coverlets and pale quilts. Not a bed for passion or illness or drama, a bed for surrendering exhaustion without explanation. She sat on its edge, and then, because the room invited it so strongly, lay back for just a little while. The mattress shaped itself around her with immediate kindness. Above her, the ceiling was painted with slow clouds and faint stitched stars. The lantern resting beside the pillow cast a buttery circle of light. A butterfly settled on the carved headboard and closed its wings. She thought then of all the times she had needed comfort and translated that need into tasks instead. All the nights she had tried to think herself toward peace instead of letting some softer thing hold her. The room of folded things did not scold. It merely offered evidence that tenderness has texture, that rest is not abstract, that the body too needs symbols of permission, weight, warmth, cover, stillness, familiar scent, a shape around it that says, "You may stop now." Perhaps because she had entered so deeply into that embodied understanding, the palace took care not to lead her too quickly into anything sharp. When she rose, it was slowly, as one rises from an old safe bed before dawn. The butterflies moved lazily ahead of her, and the next corridor curved downward, quieter than those above, carrying not mystery this time, but the sense of a remembered song waiting in another room. It was the sound, faint at first, that guided her there. Not melody exactly, but the residue of melody, as though music had once filled the palace and left behind a softness in the walls. She entered a music room with no instruments in sight. At first, there were only curtains of gauze, a polished floor, and the low silver light of windows that seemed to look not outside, but into a deeper layer of night. Yet the room was full of music all the same, not the kind one performs for an audience, not even the kind one hums deliberately to oneself. This was music that had settled into objects after years of being loved, into chairbacks, into floorboards, into the grain of a little table where someone might once have rested a cup while listening. The room itself was remembering sound. When she crossed the threshold, a single note emerged, hardly more than a breath. Then another. Soon the air held a sequence so simple it could have been a cradle song. No visible player created it. The melody rose and dissolved and returned again, each time with some tiny variation, like moonlight shifting across water. It carried no message she could translate, yet her whole body knew what it meant. You have been tired. You may stop guarding yourself for a while. She stood absolutely still. The lantern dimmed in response, leaving the room mostly to the silver pulse of the windows and the faint golden halo around her hands. A butterfly settled upon one curtain and swayed very slightly as if rocked by the song. Another rested on the floor as though even wings sometimes prefer to listen rather than move. Then, without warning and without violence, memory passed through her, not as images but as songs she had once forgotten she knew. A tune a grandmother had hummed over dishes while rain darkened kitchen glass. A nonsense melody invented for childhood tears and never written down because love believed it would be remembered forever. The half-song of trains heard from a bed near an open summer window. The gentle repetitive music of someone turning pages in the next room while one fell asleep. She realized how much of comfort enters us not through argument, but through rhythm. Breath, footsteps, rain, sewing needles, heartbeats heard through another body. The voice that does not need brilliant words because its cadence already says, "Stay, stay, stay." The palace, in its wisdom, had saved this room for later in the journey. Only now, after memory and recognition and heart-room and release, could she fully receive the truth held here, that sometimes the deepest healing is not insight, but attunement. She moved through the music room slowly, and wherever she walked, the melody altered to meet her pace. It did not follow her, it accompanied. By the time she reached the far archway, the music had become so quiet, it was almost indistinguishable from her own breathing. The line between sound and self softened. For a moment, it seemed entirely possible that every lullaby she had ever needed was already inside her chest, waiting only for enough stillness to be heard. Beyond the far archway, steps descended in a slow spiral. Their stone had been worn velvet smooth by years of invisible passage. The butterflies floated downward along the curve like drop petals, reluctant to land. The lantern's light pooled on each step. Somewhere below, there came the scent of tea and cedar and rain on roof. Not because a storm had arrived, but because the palace was preparing another return to safety before it opened its deepest center. She followed the spiral down until the steps ended in a room where someone or something had arranged hospitality with exquisite quiet care. A low table stood near a fire that made no smoke. Upon it rested a teapot, a cup of cream-colored clay, a little dish of sugared petals, and a folded blanket stitched with tiny wing-like patterns. No one was there, and yet the room had all the warmth of being expected. The chairs were placed not formally but tenderly. A lamp glowed behind a paper screen, painted with reeds and sleeping moths. Rain sounded lightly above, though the sky outside the windows was clear. The impossible coexistence of weather only made the room more kind. She poured tea without asking herself how it had remained warm. In the palace, warmth was not maintained by mechanics, but by welcome. The cup smelled of chamomile, orange peel, and something faintly floral she could not name. She drank, and the heat moved through her throat, her chest, her stomach, loosening one more small knot the day had left behind somewhere in the body. The blanket, when she drew it over her knees, felt neither new nor old, only familiar in the way a comfort can be familiar, even when one has never touched it before. This, she understood, was another form of return, not backward into memory, but inward into regulation. The palace knew that after certain rooms, letters, unlived selves, true names half approaching, even beauty can be tiring. A soul may need not more revelation, but soup, wool, warmth, and silence. It may need a little ceremony made of ordinary kindness. Drink, sit, cover your knees, listen to the fire breathe. So she did. She sat by the smokeless fire and let the tea grow lighter in the cup. Butterflies rested along the mantel, not decorative, simply present. The lantern beside the chair glowed with low domestic gold, and the whole room carried the astonishing dignity of simple care. Here there were no symbols to decipher, only soothing things offered with complete seriousness. It moved her more than she expected. There are forms of love that ask to be admired and forms of love that simply hand you a warm cup in silence. The latter had always saved her more. After a long while, she lifted her head and saw, reflected faintly in the dark window, not oneself, but many of the selves she had seen earlier in frames and doorways. Child, traveler, reader, future, elder, dreamer. None distinct enough to separate, all close enough to feel as though they had drawn nearer while she rested. They were not gone when unobserved. They gathered when she allowed herself gentleness. Perhaps that was one more secret of the palace. Tenderness is what lets the scattered self sit at one table. When at last she rose, the teacup was empty, and the rain on the roof had softened to almost nothing. She folded the blanket once and left it where she had found it. The butterflies stirred. The lantern brightened just enough to illuminate a doorway in the far wall, one she had not noticed before. Beyond it, the air felt spacious, open, night-scented. The heart of the palace, which had been approaching by circles and returns, now seemed near enough to change the quality of the dark itself. She stepped through with no more reluctance than one carries, while leaving a warm room for another warm room. Behind her, the small domestic chamber held its tea, its fire, its blanket, and its extraordinary mercy. Ahead, the palace widened, and the indigo, at its center, began to call her by a silence deeper than any voice. She left the observatory with the night still widened inside her, and as she descended again into the softer interior of the palace, the lantern's glow changed once more. It gathered itself closer, no longer scattered like starlight across distances, but intimate now, heart near, as though all that spaciousness had prepared her for a more inward kind of seeing. The butterflies drifted lower too, rushing doorframes, hovering near the walls, drawing her away from the vast glamour of the sky and back toward the rooms where the self waits in more tender forms to be recognized. The smooth door opens without touch. Inside, the chamber beyond is round and softly lit, yet no single lamp or window accounts for the light. It seems to arise from the room itself, from the walls, the floor, the air between things. At first, the chamber appears simple. Curved walls, a high quiet ceiling, a polished floor. But the moment she crosses the threshold, the entire room changes in answer to her presence. Shelves emerge where blank stone had been, lined with worn cloth-bound books and small glass objects that hold the warmth of being chosen. When kindness moves through her, the room deepens into library hush, paper and cedar and lamplight. When a shadow of sorrow passes through, rain forms upon unseen panes, tracking softly downward in silver lines, while somewhere a kettle begins to hum. When she thinks of love, not romance alone, but the steady, tender kind, the chamber fills with warm amber light and shadows shaped like joined hands and flowering vines. The room is not performing tricks. It is speaking the language of her interior life. She realizes slowly, then all at once, that this chamber is made not of stone, but of response. It is shaped by her heart. The thought does not startle her. It settles. The palace, the doors, the journal, the lantern, the child, the waiting selves, all of them have been leading here, not to a throne room or hidden treasure, but to the living center from which meaning blooms. She sits in the middle of the floor, cross-legged, lantern, resting in her lap. The butterflies enter one by one and settle along the curves of the room. On shelves, on the low arms of chairs that have just appeared, on the smooth edge of a rain-dark sill. Their wings fold. Their stillness is as important as their motion had been. Her breathing deepens. The room quiets with her. This is the place she has spent years leaving and years searching for at the same time. The inner room that changes with her truth, the one that does not ask her to be more symmetrical, more efficient, more adorned, more explainable. The room in which all the untidy weather of being human can arrive and be held without punishment. In this chamber, joy does not need to justify itself. Sadness does not need to disguise itself. Longing is not an embarrassment. Softness is not a weakness. Everything is allowed to become visible and still remain love. The lantern begins to dim, but not in a warning way. Its work is not ending from exhaustion. It is settling into peace. She understands that it never meant to illuminate an external maze forever. It meant only to accompany her until she could see by the quieter light already alive within her. The palace did not bring her a miracle from outside herself. It returned her, step by step, to the miracle that had gone unheard inside her own life. For a little while nothing more happens. That is important. The room lets the knowing deepen without demanding interpretation. Somewhere rain continues against a window that exists only when sorrow is welcome. Somewhere a shelf of beloved books breathes paper and calm. Somewhere deep under language, her whole being loosens another inch. And because every profound recognition needs a field of rest around it, the palace offers her exactly that. No new door yet, no new symbol, only the tender simplicity of being held in the room that was always hers. She leans back slightly. The butterflies remain. The walls shimmer once and then become still. She does not need to search anymore. That is the quietest truth of all. At last, the chamber bows outward into silence. And in that silence, the palace begins preparing something larger. Not louder, but wider. A central place, a final gathering, a ceremony that can happen only after seeking has softened into belonging. The passage beyond the tea room led not immediately to the great courtyard, but to an observatory open on one side to the sky. It stood high within the palace, half tower and half balcony, lined with brass instruments old enough to have become beautiful through use alone. Telescopes rested on carved wooden tripods. Charts lay rolled beside stone weights shaped like sleeping birds. A great circular window framed a section of night so pure and dark it seemed to absorb every earthly hurry. The butterflies in this room moved differently, slower, higher, as if even they grew contemplative under such a sky. She set the lantern on a narrow ledge and approached the opening. The air outside was cool enough to wake the skin without disturbing the deeper softness within her. Somewhere very far below, water moved through the grounds of the palace. Somewhere beyond the visible horizon, dawn was preparing itself in secret. Above, the stars held their unhurried positions, not glittering anxiously, but burning with the calm of things that do not question their right to exist. She looked through one of the telescopes and saw not magnified stars exactly, but patterns between them. The dark distances, the patient black silk in which light had been stitched. It struck her then how often people praise brightness and forget the holiness of space. Without quiet, there is nowhere for music to rest. Without darkness, no lamp matters. Without intervals, no story can breathe. Even the palace, for all its wings and light and memory, was built of pauses as much as of passages. That understanding moved through her with the cool clarity of night air. Much of the tiredness she carried in waking life came not only from pain or responsibility, but from the refusal of space, the refusal of rest between tasks, of silence between inputs, of emptiness between definitions. The soul, like the sky, needs room enough to contain stars without becoming all-star. It needs black silk too. It needs the slow, invisible architecture that makes radiance gentle rather than blinding. Let that be enough for now. Let the thoughts settle like velvet over the mind, and let the body simply remain where it is, supported, warm, and already on its way toward rest. The observatory offered no dramatic revelation, only scale. The blessed kind that reduces urgency, looking outward into such distance, even through a dream-made instrument in a palace of memory. She felt her own little daily failures soften. Not dismissed, softened, set back into proportion, a missed conversation, an unfinished letter, a season of uncertainty, the ache of becoming, all of it suddenly small enough to be held without panic. One can care deeply, the night seemed to say, without living at the edge of alarm. A butterfly came to rest on the brass ring around the lens. Its wings reflected the stars and, for a second, appeared filled with a whole separate sky. She smiled, not a triumphant smile, not one meant for any witness, but the private smile of a person whose inner weather has changed. When she turned from the telescope, the lantern had brightened on its ledge. A door beyond the chart stood open, where before there had been only stone. Moonlight poured through it in a pale, unbroken sheet. The observatory had done what it came to do. It had widened her. The palace was now ready to gather that widened self into its most luminous center. She picked up the lantern. The butterflies rose. The way ahead glimmered in indigo and silver. And because the deepest rooms of the palace were never reached by force, only by accumulated softness, the final approach felt less like moving forward than like being welcomed the rest of the way. As she walked the last moonlit hall, the palace seemed to breathe around her. Not metaphorically, not as an idea, but in a real dream sense by which stone, light, and atmosphere can become one living body. The floors held a slow pulse. The walls carried a faint warmth, as though moonlight itself had become circulatory. Every arch she passed under softened something else in her. Every suspended curtain, every pool of silver light, every pause between the wings of the butterflies drew her a little further from the hard, bright edges of ordinary identity. There were no more rooms now, only thresholds within the same widening hush. A corridor of perfumed dark, where climbing flowers leaned inward and released faint scents as she passed. A little bridge over black water, where lilies closed themselves like folded hands. A gallery of mirrors turned to the wall, because no more reflection was needed. A vestibule lined with blank canvases, waiting not for talent, but for weather. These spaces were not separate destinations. They were the palace, breathing her toward completion. At the final bend, she paused beside a long open window. Beyond it lay the gardens she had first seen after waking here. The silver vines, the moss, the pools, the columns, the near stars. Everything looked softer now, not because the palace had changed, but because she had. How strange and lovely, she thought without sharpness, that places often reveal themselves only after we have already been revealed to ourselves. The first time she had walked those paths, she had seen marvel. Now she also saw mercy. The first time she had noticed butterflies, she had seen invitation. Now she also saw stewardship. The first time she had read it waits quietly. She had heard mystery. Now she heard trust. The lantern in her hand was almost weightless. At moments she wondered whether she carried it, or whether it now carried only the memory of being needed. Its light had become the exact color of the glow she felt within her chest. No longer guide and guided, simply two expressions of the same inner steadiness. She rested one hand on the cool sill and let the night air move across her skin. It smelled of stone, petals, and the faintest hint of distant storms traveling elsewhere. Not here. Here there was only the fullness that comes when longing has finally found its proper room. She might have remained there for hours, looking out over the sleeping gardens and saying nothing. The palace would have allowed it. The palace did not rush endings. It seemed to understand that endings are best received as dissolves. A butterfly brushed her shoulder, then drifted ahead. Another followed. Soon a small procession of wings moved toward the great open arch at the end of the hall. Beyond it, she could already sense the vast still lake and the high indigo dome where so many wings would gather. Yet, even on this last approach, the palace gave her one more gift: slowness. Enough slowness to absorb, enough slowness to let the body and spirit arrive together. Enough slowness to ensure that the culmination ahead would not feel like spectacle erupting, but like a flower at last, fully opened, because every prior hour of root and stem had prepared for exactly this. So she walked toward the arch without hurry. Her feet made no sound. The butterflies preceded her like soft embers. The lantern breathed low gold, and all the while the palace moved with her in perfect calm, as if saying through stone and moon and scent and wing, "Yes, this is the right pace. Yes, this is how one comes home." Then the hall ended, the space opened, and the great courtyard received her beneath its patient sky. When she rises from the chamber, shaped by her heart, the lantern is no heavier than a remembered blessing. Its glow has become deep and low, like the last warm ember in a grate that no longer struggles against the dark, because it understands the dark is not an enemy. The butterflies lift themselves from the shelves in unhurried silence and drift toward an opening that had not been there before, a pale arch where a shadow has given way to an expectancy of light. She follows them into the heart of the palace. A vast courtyard opens around her, bordered by columns, draped in moonlight and pale climbing flowers. At its center lies a lake so still it seems carved from a single sheet of darkened glass. The sky above holds no stars at first, only a profound indigo depth, like the inside of closed eyes just before dreaming deepens. The air smells of water lilies, distant rain, and the faint sweetness of stone, warmed long ago by sun and still slowly releasing it. The whole courtyard has the hush of a chapel after everyone is gone, except that here nothing feels left behind. Everything feels gathered. Then she hears the wings, at first only a few. A soft tremor overhead. Then more still, until the whole sky above the open court begins to move in widening spirals. Butterflies rise from every ledge, every vine, every hidden hollow of the palace. Gold, pearl, dusk blue, amber, silver, plum, opal, all the quiet colors of memory and weather and dream. They gather not chaotically, but with ceremonial grace, arranging themselves into great, slow-turning patterns above the lake. A dome of wings forms over her, alive and breathing, a constellation made visible through touch and movement rather than distance. She stands at the center of it, with the lantern held close to her chest, not in spectacle, in belonging. That is the difference this palace has been teaching her all along. Beauty here is not meant to overwhelm. It is meant to recognize. The butterflies begin to descend. One brushes her forehead, and she feels the memory of a summer evening when she was young and unnamed by fear, lying in grass while the sky darkened around her. Another rests for a heartbeat at her collarbone, and the quiet relief of falling asleep beside someone safe moves through her body like warm rain. Another touches her fingers, and she remembers how joy once arrived in her, without invitation and without needing permission to stay. More wings follow, each one leaving behind not a burden of recollection, but a small release. Things she had forgotten she loved, things she had survived, things that had remained true even when she had not had words for them. Slowly, she sinks to her knees at the edge of the lake. The butterflies move around her in soft orbits, and the palace breathes with her, columns, flowers, water, and wing, all keeping one slow rhythm. Above, the indigo sky begins to part, not with thunder or revelation, but with tiny openings of light. Not stars exactly, more like dreamlights, each one carrying the hush of some other sleeping soul somewhere in the wide world. She understands without being told that not every light belongs to her. Some are other people's longings, other people's returns, other hearts somewhere being guided home by other wing. The thought does not make her lonely. It makes her feel held in a larger tenderness, a vast quiet fellowship of those who are searching and resting at once. For the first time in a very long while, her heart makes no request, no bargain, no hidden plea. There is nothing missing in this moment. She is not reaching toward herself. She is herself, not perfected, not polished beyond human shape, whole in the way that rivers are whole, and twilight is whole, and old houses are whole, despite the cracks that let weather in. The butterflies settle little by little. Some return to the reeds near the lake. Some drift upward and dissolve into the indigo light. Some vanish so gradually it is impossible to say when they became air. The ceremony is not ending, it is becoming quieter. And in that quieter air, when nearly every wing has come to rest, one final butterfly remained. Kneeling there beneath the dome of wings, she discovered another kind of silence hidden inside the first. Not the silence of absence, not the silence before a revelation, but the silence after enough has been understood that no further argument is necessary. It wrapped itself around her shoulders like warm dust. Around the lake, the reeds held still along the colonnades. Pale flowers leaned in moonlight and released a faint fragrance with every passing breath of air. The butterflies above did not form patterns to be interpreted. They moved as weather moves, as blessing moves, as an ancient instinct of harmony moves through a place that knows exactly what it is for. She remained on her knees for what might have been minutes or a whole season of dreams. Time in the palace had never been linear, and now it seemed to dissolve entirely. Her mind did not race to catalog what had happened, nor did it attempt to retain every detail for waking. The palace freed her from that reflex too. Some things are not meant to be captured in total. Some things enter us best when we stop clutching at them. The great mercy of the courtyard was that it let her receive without recording. As she breathed, the memory touched by each butterfly began to settle deeper, no longer separate flashes, but a warm, integrated glow. The summer field, the safe shoulder, the unearned joy, the patient survivals, the unlived selves not gone but gathered. The child still drawing impossible palaces in the blue light of evening. The room that changed shape with her heart, the tea, the letters, the music, the observatory. All of it drew together not into a lesson but into a climate. The climate of an inner world no longer abandoned. And once that inner climate formed, the whole palace seemed to exhale. The columns brightened, then softened. The lake darkened to a smoother black, reflecting not the sky above, but the calm now living within her. The dome of butterflies lowered by almost nothing, enough to make her feel sheltered without feeling enclosed. The night itself was becoming more intimate, as though the palace knew that after grandeur, a soul needs closeness. After recognition, it needs holding. She lowered the lantern from her chest and set it beside her on the stone. Its light spread outward in a low circle, illuminating her hands, the folds of her dress, the nearest petals scattered on the courtyard floor. Those hands looked different to her now, not changed in shape, yet changed in meaning. Hands that had carried too much, perhaps, but had also made, soothed, tended, written, opened, persisted. Hands worthy of rest. She placed one palm over her heart and felt there, beneath skin and breath and the quiet ache of being alive, a steadiness she had spent years mistaking for fragility simply because it was gentle. Yet gentleness was not fragility. The palace had taught that over and over without needing to say it directly. Butterflies are not weak because they move softly. Keys are not less powerful because they wait quietly. Lanterns are not lesser lights because they guide without glare. Hearts are not failures because they remain tender after disappointment. The thought might have become grand in another story, but not here. Here it arrived as comfort, a sentence the body could trust. She closed her eyes and allowed it to settle wherever it wished. When she opened them again, the last butterfly had not yet come. Or perhaps it had always been near, waiting until this exact depth of quiet had been reached. Either way, the next moment came not as climax, but as intimacy. A single wing beat in the center of 1,000 settled wings. A final approach, a final recognition, and when it touched her palm and spoke her deeper name, she was ready enough to hear it not as performance, not as reward, but as home. It hovers before her as though waiting for the exact stillness in which it can be received. Its wings are the soft color of bruised plum, edged with the faintest silver fire, not bright enough to startle, steady enough to be trusted. It comes closer, and lowers itself into her open palm. The moment it touches her skin, warmth unfolds beneath her ribs. Not dramatic, not flooding, but certain. Like a door inside the body opening inward. Then she hears her name. Not the name spoken by school registers. Not the name used in doorways or written at the top of forums. Not even the name softened by affection in the mouths of those who love her. This name is older than all of those, deeper. It seems woven from lullabies, old grief, first wonder, patient endurance, and that hidden wildness that never entirely surrendered itself. It is the name beneath all public names, the private music of who she has always been, even when no one, including herself, had the language to say it aloud. The sound does not reach her ears, it rises through her in silence. Her soul recognizes it before her mind can follow, and because it is so true, everything within her answers at once. The tension she did not know she was still holding loosened. The last little distances inside her close. To hear this name is not to become someone else. It is to be returned, fully and gently, to the deepest shape of herself. The butterfly leaves her palm and comes to rest near her shoulder, as though it has always belonged there. The lake ripples in perfect widening circles. The lantern in her hands gives one final bright pulse, then softens to a warm, companionable glow. Above, the light in the sky opens wider. She looks upward and for a moment sees herself not in mirror or memory, but distributed through everything around her. In the moonlight on water, in the hush between wings, in the columns, in the patient breathing of the palace itself, every part of the journey has been a chapter written in the grammar of her own heart. Nothing more needs to be proven now. The palace has not asked for mastery. It has asked for recognition. The butterflies have not tested her. They have accompanied her. Even the key did not grant worthiness. It only opened what had been waiting for her quiet. The courtyard grows still, full, but still. The kind of stillness that comes after truth has found its resting place. Across the water, a small door appears. It is plain compared to all the others she has seen. Dark wood, simple frame, the faint early glow of morning along its edges. She knows at once that this is not a door into the past or deeper into dream. It is the waking door, the one that leads forward, not away from the palace, but out carrying it differently. She does not rush toward it. Instead, she turns slowly, giving the courtyard one last long gaze. The lake, the moonlit columns, the paths of wings now folded into silence. The place where she knelt and wanted nothing. Gratitude rises in her, not as speech but as a soft bow, somewhere inside the chest. Thank you, not only to the palace, but to the quiet part of herself that allowed it to exist at all. Then she begins to walk, bare feet over cool stone, lantern at her side, the butterfly resting lightly against her shoulder like a living seal upon the whole journey. The door opens before she reaches it, and beyond lies the first color of dawn, waiting. As gently as the palace once waited in the dark. She steps through into morning. The light outside is tender, not yet fully gold, touched with pale blue and blush pink, and the kind of hush that exists only before the world remembers its own noise. The air is cool and sweet with dew. Somewhere in the distance, a bird prepares a first note, and then seems to think better of it, choosing one more moment of silence instead. The grass is wet, the sky is open, the butterfly remains at her shoulder for a few quiet breaths more. Behind her, the palace shimmers once in the softening light. It does not vanish with a theatrical flourish. It recedes the way dreams recede from deep sleep, slowly, gratefully, leaving their temperature behind. The arches, the halls, the lake, the luminous dust, the chamber of the heart. All of it seems to fold into a finer dimension of reality rather than disappear. Not gone, waiting, not distant, quiet. She closes her eyes and feels within her chest the place where the lantern had rested. The warmth there is steady now. It does not flare for attention. It does not ask to be admired. It simply exists, calm and unwavering, as though a small room of golden evening has been built beneath her ribs and furnished with peace. She understands then, with a clarity too gentle to feel like a conclusion, that the journey was never about finding a magical palace somewhere outside herself. It was about discovering that she had always been carrying the architecture of refuge within her own being. Home is not a single address in the world, not a flawless room, not a remembered house, not a fantasy preserved from childhood. Home is the quiet inner light that remains when all the borrowed voices have gone still. Home is the place inside where the forgotten child can keep drawing, where the unlived selves may remain beloved without accusation, where the heart can change shape without losing its center. Home is what she can now carry into ordinary mornings, difficult afternoons, sleepless evenings, and small unexpected griefs. Not as an idea, but as a living warmth. At last the butterfly lifts from her shoulder. It rises through the dawn air with effortless grace, circling her once before drifting upward into the brightening sky. She watches it go without sadness. Some things do not leave in order to be lost. They lift only so we can recognize them more clearly in the world around us. Soon it is only a glimmer among the waking colors, and then not even that. Yet the sensation of its wings remains, barely there against her skin, like a blessing too light to weigh anything down. She walks forward through the meadow of dawn. Each breath tastes of beginnings. Behind her, the palace has become invisible, but not absent. Ahead of her, the day has not yet filled itself with language. She can feel how easy it would be later for the practical world to close around her again with its errands, messages, obligations, and measurable demand. But she also knows something now that she did not know before, or had forgotten too deeply to use. Whenever the world grows loud, the quiet path inward remains. The key remains. The wings remain. The waiting remains. Perhaps that is why such palaces exist at all, not to separate us from living, but to return us to it more gently, to show us that stillness is not emptiness, that softness is not weakness, that the hidden rooms of the self do not need to be renovated into perfection before they can be inhabited with love. So let the morning stay blurred at the edges a little longer. Let the light arrive slowly. Let the story continue not as a finished thing, but as a calm place inside you that will go on opening in secret ways, especially when you most need it. If ever you feel the old tightness returning, if ever you feel yourself becoming too far from your own listening, imagine once more the velvet book, the butterfly key, the lantern sighing awake, the chamber that changed with the weather of your heart. Imagine the courtyard full of wings. Imagine the true name sounding softly below all noise. The palace will still be there. It waits quietly, and now there is nothing left for you to do. The key has been found, the door has opened, the journey has taken its shape and then loosened it again. You may rest inside what remains. You may let the dawn dissolve. You may let the butterflies fold themselves into the dark behind your eyes. You may sleep, if sleep is near, or drift, if drifting is what comes first. Either way, you are held. The night knows how to keep gentle things safe. The palace knows how to wait. The wings know the way. So rest now in that inner light. Rest while the garden breathes. Rest while the old house holds its rain. Rest while the lake lies still beneath a sky of folded wing. Rest while your true name settles warmly into silence. And if, somewhere just beyond thought, you sense a door of dark wood softly glowing at the edge of another dream, you will know there is no need to hurry. It will wait quietly. It always has. She crossed the threshold into dawn once, and then again, in the deeper sense by which waking continues long after eyes have opened. The meadow outside the palace was silvered with dew. Each blade of grass held a drop of morning so delicately that the world seemed covered in 1,000 tiny lanterns. Mist lay low over the earth in pale rivers. The air was cool enough to sharpen the edges of each breath, yet soft enough to feel like a caress rather than a correction. Nothing in the landscape demanded she decide who she would be now. It allowed her to emerge. This, too, was a kindness. The palace did not deliver her from dream into immediate usefulness. It gave her a buffer of meadow and sky, of birds not yet fully committed to singing, of flowers still folded against the remnants of night. How often, she thought with a smile too slight to disturb anything, does waking life forget the importance of transition? We fling ourselves from darkness to brightness, from stillness to obligation, from inwardness to display, and then wonder why our hearts lag behind. The palace had known better. It had always known better. It arranged all its passages with respect for thresholds. She walked slowly through the dawn field, while the butterfly remained near her cheek, and the lantern warmed her hand. At a distance, she could still sense the palace, though when she turned to look, the place itself had already become difficult to see. Not hidden exactly, more like present on another frequency. The arches were now suggestions in the mist. The courtyard, perhaps only a difference in the quality of the light. The lake may be no longer visible at all, and still she knew with the certainty one reserves for deep places that it remained. A breeze moved across the meadow, carrying the scent of jasmine and rain, though neither flower nor cloud seemed near enough to explain it. The scent reminded her that not everything true requires visible origin. Some forms of belonging are atmospheric, some sanctuaries travel as weather. Perhaps the palace would return to her, not only in sleep, but in certain evenings, certain windows after rainfall, certain books without titles, certain moments when a room grew unexpectedly gentle around her. Perhaps its architecture would continue appearing in fragments throughout the ordinary world, each fragment asking only whether she was quiet enough to notice. The butterfly lifted from her shoulder then and flew ahead, low over the grass, not leading but accompanying. She followed its path past a small stand of trees whose leaves held the last cool shadow of the retreating night. Beyond them, the land opened into a path she could imagine taking into any life at all. A village path, a city morning, a kitchen, a train platform, a day of work, a difficult conversation, a peaceful afternoon. The palace did not choose for her. It simply returned to her, the one thing by which every path becomes more inhabitable. The ability to remain in contact with the quiet inner room, even while moving through noise. She stopped once more and closed her eyes. The lantern's warmth had faded into her chest. The butterfly's wings had become a sensation rather than an object. Her true name rested below thought, no longer freshly spoken, but settled like a stone at the bottom of clear water. She breathed, in, out. The meadow breathed with her. The sky brightened almost imperceptibly when she opened her eyes. The path ahead looked ordinary in the most sacred way. Ordinary like bread, like clean sheets, like a hand on a shoulder, like opening a window, like a person waking with enough stillness inside them to meet the day without abandoning themselves in the process. She took the first step into that ordinariness with reverence, and because the palace had never been separate from the deepest truth of her own life, that step was not away from magic at all. It was magic continuing in another form for a long time afterward. Though afterward in such stories is always a fluid word. She would remember the palace not as a sequence of marvels, but as a quality of attention. The way a room feels when nothing in it is hostile to softness. The way memory changes when it is lit from within by kindness instead of interrogation. The way unlived possibilities become less accusing when welcomed as beautiful branches rather than failures. The way the body settles when offered tea and blankets and rain instead of further analysis. The way even the largest revelations arrive best when preceded by corridors, flowers, and breath. If she ever found again some titleless book on a high forgotten shelf, she would smile differently now. If she ever felt the old ache of not having become all her younger selves had imagined, she would hear those frames clearing in the room of forgotten selves and remember that possibility folds inward rather than dies. If she ever sat by a window on a difficult evening and felt the world pressing too close, perhaps she would picture the observatory and the black silk between the stars and give herself again a little spaciousness. If she ever lay awake feeling too much like a task list in human shape, perhaps she would think of the room of folded things and allow actual comfort to become part of prayer. These were not resolutions. The palace dealt in no such sharp promises. It offered subtler gifts than that: recurrence, return, the reminder that one need not live permanently at the level of emergency, the assurance that the innermost room of the self remains furnished even when neglected, the invitation to believe that quiet is not merely what remains when noise leaves, but a presence with architecture, ritual, and care. And perhaps this was the palace's hidden wisdom for anyone listening from the edge of sleep, that the self is not found once and for all in one dazzling breakthrough. It is visited, left, revisited, forgotten, remembered, entered again by smaller doors, sometimes through dreams, sometimes through grief, sometimes through old books or gardens or ordinary morning, sometimes only through the decision to lie still long enough for the wings to become audible. The day would come, of course, when ordinary concerns returned. She would answer messages, lose patience, misplace tenderness, feel too busy to listen, forget what she knew in the courtyard, wonder whether she had imagined the whole thing. That was never the danger. The danger had always been believing that forgetting meant the palace was gone. Now she knew better. It waits quietly. The phrase had changed from mystery to promise, from memory to method. If forgotten, return softly. If overwhelmed, return slowly. If lonely, return by any small threshold available. Tea, rain, fabric, breath, window, page, music, moonlight. One kind thought allowed to remain unsolved. Even now, as the dawn field thins and the waking world begins perhaps to gather around you again, that promise remains. Not because a story says so, but because some part of you has already recognized its truth. There are rooms in you that do not lock against your return. There are forgotten selves in you that do not resent being seen late. There is a chamber in you shaped by the weather of your heart, and it can still become beautiful when met honestly. There is an inner observatory, an inner tea room, an inner music room, an inner courtyard where your heart, for one blessed interval, may want nothing at all. And there is always, always, somewhere nearby in the dark, a butterfly waiting to move its wings just enough for you to hear the path opening. So if sleep has already come close, let it come closer now. Let the palace stop being a place you picture and become a climate that settles through your body. Let the marble arches become the easing of your shoulders. Let the pond become the smoothness of your breathing. Let the butterflies become the little drifting thoughts that no longer need to land anywhere urgent. Let the journal close. Let the lantern dim. Let the tea cool. Let the letters remain beautifully unsent for now. Let the child at the windowsill keep drawing in peace. Let the unlived selves rest in their frames like stars reflected in water. You do not need to carry every image with equal clarity. You do not need to remember the sequence perfectly. Sleep does not require perfect recall. It asks for atmosphere, for permission, for the relinquishing of usefulness. If the palace leaves you with only one feeling, let it be this: there is a room within you that no demand can permanently close, and you are allowed to rest there even when the world forgets how. The night around you is patient. It knows how long certain softenings take. It knows some people come towards sleep by way of story, some by way of scent, some by way of remembered voices, some only by the slow repetition of being told they are safe. So hear it once more in whatever language your body trusts most. You are safe enough now to become drowsy, safe enough now to release the small vigilance still hiding in the back of the neck, in the hands, in the tongue, in the places behind the eyes. Safe enough now to let the thoughts at the edge of the bed remain there unanswered until morning, or longer if necessary. Perhaps somewhere just beyond the reach of ordinary hearing, the palace is settling too. Curtains gone still, the lake returning to perfect glass, the observatory holding its stars, the conservatory breathing against the roof, the tea room banked in ember light, the room of folded things cool and fragrant in the dark, the music room carrying one last cradle note into silence, the chamber of the heart resting with all its weather welcomed, the true name butterfly folded into sleep against a carved lattice. None of it is lost, none of it is asking to be managed. It is enough that it exists. It is enough that you have passed through it, in whatever way stories pass through us when we lie still in the dark. It is enough that something in you recognized the path. Now, the dawn field can blur. The meadow can grow pale and distant. The last visible wing can fold into shadow. The key may return to its pocket. The book may close. The old house may keep its reign. The garden may sink beneath the level of thought. The door of dark wood may glow once, faintly, and then become only a feeling of warmth somewhere behind the breastbone. You do not need to walk any farther tonight. You do not need to understand any more. You do not need to hold yourself so carefully. The earth is steady beneath you. The room is dark enough. The breath is simple enough. The story is soft enough now to loosen gently into sleep. So drift if you are drifting, sink if you are sinking, rest if you are resting, and should you feel, even for a moment, that small hidden movement of wings in the dark, let it reassure rather than awaken you. It means only that the palace remembers. It means only that something kind within you remains on watch while you let go. It waits quietly, it waits kindly, and tonight it can keep waiting while you rest.